I pulled you over because you were swerving. Step out of the vehicle now.
I wasn't swerving.
You fit a description of a suspicious person. You're resisting.
The body camera footage would later show the exact moment Officer Tyler McGrath decided that suspicion was enough to rip open a truck door, enough to slam a decorated green beret against hot steel, enough to write a report that would unravel his career in less than 72 hours. It was 5:38 p.m. in Fayetteville, North Carolina, just outside Fort Liberty, where military families blended into quiet subdivisions and pickup trucks were as common as porch lights. And Master Sergeant Daniel Brooks, retired U.S. Army Special Forces, was doing nothing more controversial than driving home from a client meeting in his dark blue Ford F-150, hands steady on the wheel, radio low, mind already on dinner plans with his wife. 18 years in uniform had wired Brooks for awareness. He noticed the patrol car 2 vehicles back at the intersection, noticed it linger when the light changed, noticed it turn when he turned, but he did what he'd done on dusty roads overseas and on American highways alike. He stayed calm and drove predictably. Officer McGrath, 26 years old, 14 months out of the academy, had been told in briefing that burglaries were up in transitional neighborhoods, a phrase vague enough to mean anything and nothing. And when he saw Brooks' truck roll through Maple Ridge Estates, a mostly white, upper-middle-class subdivision dotted with flagpoles and security signs, something in his mind clicked into place. Later, in his official report, he would write, "Vehicle appeared out of place for the area. Driver avoided eye contact and gripped steering wheel tightly. Behavior consistent with criminal evasion." The body cam would tell a different story. The truck maintained its lane without deviation, speed steady, turn signals used properly, driver facing forward like every other commuter on the road. Dispatch ran the plates at McGrath's request. Registration valid. Owner Daniel Brooks. No wants. No warrants. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. McGrath hit his lights. The siren chirped once, sharp and unnecessary. Brooks exhaled slowly and pulled over immediately, signal on, tires aligned neatly with the curb. He rolled down the window before the officer even reached the door, both hands visible on the steering wheel. "Good evening, officer," Brooks said, voice even. McGrath didn't return the greeting. License and registration. No explanation. No reason. Brooks retrieved the documents carefully, narrating his movements out of habit. Registrations in the glove box. McGrath leaned slightly toward the open window, scanning the interior like he expected contraband to materialize under the seats. "You were swerving back there," he said abruptly. Brooks blinked once. "I don't believe I was." The statement wasn't argumentative, it was factual. On camera, the roadway behind them stretched straight and empty. "Step out of the vehicle," McGrath ordered. Brooks paused, just long enough for the shift to register. "May I ask why?" McGrath's jaw tightened. "Because I'm telling you to. Step out now." Years of operational discipline kept Brooks from reacting emotionally. He unbuckled, opened the door slowly, and stepped out with his hands visible at chest height. He was 6 feet 1 inch, broad-shouldered, posture erect even in civilian clothes, the kind of bearing that comes from 2 decades of being the calmest man in the worst room. McGrath seemed to interpret that calm as defiance. "Turn around." Brooks complied. "Place your hands on the HUD." He complied again. The metal was warm from the afternoon sun. "Officer," he said quietly, "I'd still like to know the reason for the stop." What happened next would become the clip replayed on local news for weeks. Without further warning, McGrath grabbed Brooks' left wrist and shoved him forward, pressing his chest against the HUD with unnecessary force. "Stop resisting," McGrath barked. The footage showed no resistance. "I'm not resisting," Brooks replied, voice steady, but strained against the pressure. A neighbor's front door opened across the street. A woman stepped out holding a phone, drawn by the sudden aggression in the officer's voice. McGrath reached for his cuffs. "You fit a description," he said. "What description?" Brooks asked. Silence hung for half a second too long. "Suspicious individual casing houses." What was he wearing? Another pause. The cuffs clicked around Brooks' wrists, tighter than necessary. "Don't play games with me." Brooks winced slightly, but did not pull away. "I'm not playing games. I'm asking for probable cause." That word, probable cause, seemed to inflame McGrath more than anything else. "You think you know the law?" Brooks turned his head just enough to be heard clearly by the bodycam mic. I know enough. McGrath leaned close. You're in my neighborhood acting suspicious. Brooks' reply was measured. This isn't your neighborhood. It was a small correction, but it landed like a challenge. Another patrol car rolled slowly past the intersection, but did not stop. The woman across the street continued recording. Brooks could feel the weight of the situation shifting, not physically, but narratively, the way it does when someone has already decided what role you're playing. Keep your hands where I can see them, McGrath snapped, though they hadn't moved. They haven't left the HUD. The radio crackled faintly on McGrath's shoulder, dispatch repeating that there were no burglary calls in the immediate area. McGrath either didn't hear it or chose not to respond. He began patting down Brooks' waistband. You arm. I have a concealed carry permit, Brooks said calmly. Firearm is locked in the center console. I have not reached for it. That disclosure, made voluntarily and by the book, only heightened the officer's agitation. So you do have a weapon. Legally owned. Properly stored. The pat-down continued, rough and unnecessary. You military or something? McGrath asked, noticing the faint tan line where a watch had been worn daily for years. Retired. Yeah. There was skepticism in the tone. Brooks inhaled once. 18 years. Special Forces. McGrath gave a short laugh. Sure you are. And that was the moment. Visible, audible, undeniable. When suspicion stopped being about crime and started being about disbelief, about the refusal to reconcile the image in front of him with the narrative he had already written in his head. The cuffs stayed on. The accusations stayed vague. The body camera kept recording. And the sun, indifferent and bright above Maple Ridge Estates, lit every second of what was about to cost Officer Tyler McGrath his badge. The body camera would later capture the exact second Officer McGrath realized the story he had invented was collapsing in real time. Not because of what Daniel Brooks said, but because of what the evidence refused to support. With Brooks still cuffed against the hood of his own truck, wrists cinched tighter than department policy allowed, McGrath began narrating loudly for the camera, a tactic taught to frame encounters before supervisors ever reviewed them. Subject was extremely nervous, he said into the mic, though Brooks' breathing remained slow and controlled. Refused to comply with lawful commands. The footage showed immediate compliance. Across the street, the neighbor's phone remained raised, capturing his second angle. Brooks turned his head slightly. Officer, I have complied with every instruction. McGrath ignored him and began searching the truck's interior without asking consent and without articulating probable cause. He opened the driver's door wider, leaned inside, and scanned the seats. Where's the weapon? Center console, Brooks answered calmly. Locked, as I stated. McGrath popped the console and found a legally holstered handgun, safety engaged. He stepped back, holding it up like a trophy. So you lied? No, Brooks replied evenly. I disclosed it immediately. The neighbor's voice could be heard faintly from across the street. He told you that. McGrath shot her a glare. Ma'am, step back. But she didn't stop recording. Dispatch crackled again. Unit 12, we're not showing any active bolo for a gray or blue pickup in your sector. A pause. Can you confirm reason for stop? McGrath hesitated, barely a second, but enough to matter. Investigative detention, he responded quickly. Possible casing activity. Copy, dispatch replied. Tone neutral but noticeably restrained. Brooks spoke again, voice still controlled despite the metal biting into his wrists. Officer, I'd like a supervisor present. McGrath stepped closer, lowering his voice. You don't get to make demands. I'm not demanding, Brooks said. I'm requesting oversight. That word seemed to irritate McGrath more than anything else. He stepped back and keyed his radio. Send a supervisor. When he returned to Brooks, his posture had shifted from aggressive to defensive. Why are you in this neighborhood? He asked abruptly. I live 3 blocks over, Brooks answered. Address is on my license. McGrath flipped it open again, scanning the printed information he had already seen. It matched. What do you do for work? I run a veteran training nonprofit. Before that, Brooks hesitated only long enough to decide how much truth to give a man who had already decided not to believe him. United States Army. Doing what? The body cam caught the smallest exhale before Brooks answered. Master Sergeant. Special Forces. McGrath's mouth twitched, skepticism layered over something else, something defensive. You got proof of that? Brooks nodded toward his back pocket. Wallet. McGrath removed it and began flipping through its contents. Driver's license. Veteran health ID. Retired military ID with embedded hologram. A folded card bearing the crest of the U.S. Army Special Forces. McGrath paused longer this time. The camera zoomed slightly as he lifted the retired military credential closer to his face. This could be fake, he muttered. Brooks didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet but firm. It isn't. A second patrol unit pulled up behind McGrath's cruiser. Lights off, but presence unmistakable. Officer Hernandez stepped out, assessing the scene in seconds. Compliant subject cuffed. No visible threat. Neighborhood calm except for one recording witness. What's the situation? Hernandez asked. Suspicious vehicle, McGrath replied quickly. Refusal to identify. Hernandez glanced at Brooks. You refused? No. Brooks answered. I provided license immediately. Hernandez looked at McGrath, then at the open wallet in his hand. You run him? Yeah. Anything. No warrants. Hernandez's eyebrows lifted slightly. Then why's he cuffed? McGrath's jaw tightened. Officer safety. The phrase hung in the air, vague, elastic, often used to justify escalation. Hernandez shifted his weight. He do anything? Silence stretched a fraction too long. He was argumentative. Brooks finally turned his head enough to make eye contact with the second officer. I asked why I was stopped. Hernandez's gaze flicked back to McGrath. That's not resistance. The neighbor's phone remained steady. Another front door opened further down the block. The scene was no longer isolated. McGrath seemed to sense the momentum shifting. He stepped closer to Hernandez, lowering his voice, though the bodycam still caught most of it. He says he's Special Forces. Hernandez looked again at the credential in McGrath's hand. That's a legit retiree ID. McGrath didn't answer. Brooks spoke once more, not louder, but with a weight that came from experience. Officer, you said I fit a description. I'm asking again, what description? McGrath opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. Male. Acting suspicious. Hernandez exhaled audibly. That's not a description. Dispatch broke in again, more direct this time. Unit 12, confirming no burglary calls in Maple Ridge within last 24 hours. The silence that followed was heavier than any raised voice. Hernandez looked at McGrath. You want to tell me what this really is? McGrath's posture stiffened. I made a call. Brooks closed his eyes briefly, not in anger, but in recognition. He had seen this before, in different uniforms, in different countries. The moment when authority realizes it has overstepped but refuses to admit it. Hernandez stepped closer to Brooks. Sir, I'm going to remove these cuffs. McGrath didn't protest, but he didn't assist either. The metal clicked open. Brooks lowered his hands slowly, rubbing his wrists where faint red lines had already formed. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply stood upright again, posture returning to composed readiness. Hernandez handed him back his wallet. Apologies for the inconvenience. Brooks met his eyes. This wasn't an inconvenience. The statement wasn't hostile. It was factual. McGrath shifted uncomfortably. The bodycam light blinked steadily on his chest, recording every microexpression. You're free to go, he said stiffly. Brooks didn't move immediately. Officer, he said quietly, looking directly at McGrath now. You wrote the conclusion before you gathered the facts. McGrath didn't respond. Brooks stepped back toward his truck, then paused once more. And for the record, he added calmly, I never resisted. The neighbor lowered her phone only after Brooks got back into his vehicle. As he closed the door, the bodycam captured McGrath exhaling sharply and muttering under his breath. Guy thinks being military makes him untouchable. Hernandez turned his head slowly. It's not about that, he said. But the camera was still recording, and what it had captured was no longer just a traffic stop. It was the unraveling of a narrative that could not survive its own footage. The body camera footage was never supposed to leave the department's server, but by the time the Internal Affairs Review officially opened, 3 different copies were already circulating. One from the neighbor's phone, one quietly shared by an officer who knew the stop had gone sideways, and one pulled through a public records request filed less than 48 hours after Daniel Brooks posted a single sentence on social media. I was detained in my own neighborhood without cause. The footage speaks for itself. It did. The video showed the straight driving pattern. It showed immediate compliance. It showed the absence of any articulated description. It showed the scuff. It showed the cuffs. And most damaging of all, it showed Officer Tyler McGrath narrating a version of events that the lens directly contradicted. Within 72 hours, the clip of McGrath saying, "Subject was extremely nervous and refused lawful commands," was being played side by side with footage of Brooks calmly stating, "I have complied with every instruction." News stations slowed the frame where Brooks' hands were clearly visible when McGrath yelled, "Stop resisting." Veterans groups picked it up first, then civil rights attorneys, then national outlets. By the end of the week, the phrase "suspicion is not probable cause" was trending locally, printed across social media graphics featuring a still image of Brooks pressed against the hood of his truck. Internal Affairs pulled McGrath's prior stops. Patterns emerged quickly. 12 discretionary suspicious vehicle stops in 8 months. 9 involving black drivers. No arrests. No contraband. 3 citizen complaints previously marked unfounded. The language in those reports mirrored the Brooks stop almost word for word. Nervous behavior, evasive posture, high crime indicators. Supervisors began noticing something else. The bodycam timestamps didn't always match the written narratives. In 2 prior stops, McGrath had activated his camera only after initial contact, leaving critical seconds unrecorded. In the Brooks stop, the automatic activation tied to his light bar prevented that gap. Technology had done what oversight had not. The department initially released a measured statement. Officer McGrath conducted a lawful investigative detention based on reasonable suspicion. That statement lasted exactly 19 hours. When the full bodycam leaked, unedited, complete with dispatch confirming no burglary calls, the language changed. "We are reviewing the totality of the circumstances." The mayor called the chief at 6:12 a.m. the following morning. By noon, McGrath was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. By 4 p.m., the city council had scheduled an emergency public safety session. Daniel Brooks did not shout. He did not hold rallies. He did not threaten. He hired counsel. The lawsuit, filed in federal court under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, alleged unlawful detention, excessive force, false reporting, and violation of 4th and 14th Amendment protections. The complaint was precise. It cited timestamps. It referenced dispatch audio transcripts. It included still frames from the bodycam showing Brooks' hands visible when accused of resisting. It noted the absence of any bolo or call for service. It highlighted the inconsistency between McGrath's written report and the recorded evidence. And it requested not only compensatory damages, but mandatory policy reform. Discovery proved devastating for the city. Training logs showed McGrath had completed only 4 hours of de-escalation instruction beyond academy minimums. Supervisory ride-along evaluations described him as proactive, but overly confident in threat assessment. One field training officer had written, 6 months earlier, tends to interpret noncompliance where none exists. That note was never escalated. Bodycam audit records revealed that supervisory reviews were conducted randomly. Less than 5% of total stops ever examined in full. When McGrath was deposed, he doubled down. "I believe the subject posed a threat," he testified. "Based on what?" Brooks' attorney asked. McGrath paused. "His demeanor." "Define threatening demeanor." "Silence." "He questioned my authority." The transcript circulated widely among legal analysts. Questioning authority, it turned out, was not a crime. Public pressure intensified. Veterans organized a silent march outside City Hall. No chants, no signs beyond American flags, and a single banner reading, "He served." He complied. Brooks spoke once, briefly, at a press conference. He wore a Navy suit, posture straight, voice even. "This is not about my military service," he said. "If anything, my training kept this from escalating. This is about constitutional standards. Suspicion without facts becomes bias. Bias backed by force becomes dangerous." He did not attack McGrath personally. He did not speculate about motive. He spoke about systems. 2 weeks later, Internal Affairs concluded its investigation. Findings: violation of stop-and-detention policy, violation of use of force continuum, filing of an inaccurate official report, failure to properly articulate reasonable suspicion. The chief announced termination at a tightly controlled press briefing. Officer McGrath's conduct fell below the standards of this department. The question shouted from the back of the room cut through the rehearsed tone. Why were prior complaints dismissed? The chief did not answer directly. The civil case did not go to trial. Facing mounting evidence and potential punitive damages, the city entered mediation. Settlement negotiations stretched for months. Ultimately, the city agreed to pay $6.4 million, one of the largest individual misconduct settlements in the county's history. But the monetary figure was only part of it. The agreement mandated structural reforms, supervisory review of all discretionary suspicion-based stops, mandatory articulation training requiring officers to document objective factors before initiating detention, expanded bodycam audit quotas, and independent civilian oversight for complaints involving use of force without arrest. Brooks directed a significant portion of the settlement into establishing the Sentinel Initiative, a nonprofit offering legal support and policy advocacy for veterans and civilians subjected to unlawful stops. He insisted the organization partner with law enforcement trainers rather than operate in opposition. Accountability and professionalism are not enemies, he said at the launch event. They're the same standard applied correctly. As for McGrath, termination was not the final consequence. The state's Peace Officer Standards Board opened its own review. His certification was suspended pending hearing. Without it, he could not work in any law enforcement capacity statewide. Bodycam footage, once a routine tool, had become permanent record. Every academy instructor within the region now had access to the clip. It was incorporated into curriculum under a new module titled, Articulating Reasonable Suspicion, when presence is not probable cause. The neighborhood where it began returned to normal rhythm. Kids rode bikes again. Porch lights flickered on at dusk. Brooks still drove the same truck down the same streets. The difference was invisible but significant. Now, every officer in the district knew the name Daniel Brooks. Not because he was Special Forces, not because he sued, but because his stop had become a benchmark. The example supervisors cited when reminding rookies that authority without articulation collapses under review. In the final internal affairs summary, one line stood out more than any other. Officer relied on generalized suspicion rather than specific, objective facts. It was bureaucratic language for something simpler. The camera does not assume. It records. And in this case, what it recorded cost a badge, reshaped a department's policy, and reinforced a lesson that should have been obvious long before the lights ever flashed behind that blue pickup truck. Suspicion is not evidence. Compliance is not resistance. And when the truth is captured in high definition, it does not negotiate.